We just removed the screws. We're going to put the screws back together now. Locking screws. But we replaced the head. What parts do we need to replace? Lift the fixtures up and insert the drill. If you have any questions while using the system, please feel free to contact us at any time. jhimis.com or jhimis.net. This nozzle can assemble screws or disassemble screws. It is better to use this nozzle. If you have M0.8 screws, you need to use the corresponding M0.8 feeder parts. If you have M1.0 screws, you need to use the corresponding M1.0 feeder parts. Use screws of different specifications, just replace different parts. This feeder uses M1.7 screws, and we will replace the parts now. Replace the trachea of the conveyor screw. This is a large trachea, used for M1.7 screws. The screw trachea of M0.8 and M1.0 are universal, and there is no need to replace the trachea. We need to put the trachea in the innermost part. Look at the position of the joints of the trachea. The trachea is here. Be sure to install it to the end. If you don't install it to the end, the screw will get stuck, and then tighten the screw. Tighten this screw. If the trachea does not need to be replaced, this one does not need to be removed. If you need to replace the large screw, you need to replace the trachea. We are now replacing the large screw with the small screw, so we need to replace this trachea. M1.7, M1.5 screws, you need to replace the trachea. And the trachea has to pass through the middle of the sensor. Wear it down here. This is an air-blowing pipe, which is used to remove screws. You can also remove the screws without blowing. This blowing trachea is used to blow the screw out when removing the screw. Let's put it here first. We found that it is also possible to remove the screws without using this trachea. If the screw sticks to the drill bit, you can use the trachea to blow it. Let's put this trachea in place first. This is the screw delivery pipe, which needs to be connected to the nozzle. This trachea joint part must be installed at the bottom. We are now removing the tracheal connector. You see, there is a step inside him. This trachea must be inserted into the step. You can see that the trachea has now reached the bottom. Be sure to insert the trachea to the bottom. If the trachea is not inserted to the end, the screw will often get stuck. We can compare the length of the trachea inserted to the bottom to determine whether it has reached the bottom. Now let's take a look at the length of the plug to the end. What should it take? If the trachea is inserted to the bottom, it should require such a long distance. Like this, the trachea has been installed to the bottom. If the trachea is only inserted in this position, there is no bottom. When inserting the trachea, we are going to press this white buckle down. After pressing, it is easy to enter. This one is the same, it needs to be installed at the bottom. Insert this into the bottom and tighten the screws. If this trachea connector is not inserted into the bottom, the problem of screwing can also occur. We need to loosen this screw first, and then insert the trachea connector into the bottom. If this screw is easy to screw to the bottom, it means that our trachea is not inserted to the bottom. Indicates that the trachea joint is above the screw and the trachea joint is not fixed properly. Therefore, we must also insert this trachea joint to the bottom. We just replaced the trachea. Now we need to replace the feeder parts with the corresponding specification screws. If you need to assemble the M0.8 screws, you need to replace the gland parts that use this M0.8. Now the M1.7 screw is used on the feeder. You need to use the corresponding gland component that matches the specifications of the screws you are using. Since this cannot be shared, the corresponding parts need to be selected. These four screws need to be removed before they can be replaced. This is an M1.7, and these two parts need to be replaced. Then we replaced the parts of the corresponding specification screws. We are now using M1.0 screws, so we use the corresponding parts. Our gland parts should not come into contact with this slide track. This gland part needs to be in a straight line with the slide rail, do not touch it, and keep a slight distance. The screws come in from these tracks and need to stay straight. Then we tighten the four screws. These tracks should be kept in a straight line with the same height up and down. In this way, the screws can move forward smoothly. This screw track also needs to be replaced. This screw channel is M1.7, which is larger than M1.0, so it also needs to be replaced. We need to loosen these two screws to remove them. Remove these two screws and replace this material channel. Also, there can be no dirty things under this one. If there are dirty things, we need to clean them up, otherwise the material channels will not be installed properly. We replaced the screw track of M1.0. When replacing, be sure to check whether it is in a straight line and whether the height of the screw track is the same as the height of the track. After installation, you need to check whether the height of this screw channel is the same as that of this small guide rail. These tracking components must be flat and highly uniform, with no left-right misalignment. The heights of these three components must be flat and the heights are the same. There can be no left-right dislocation. The assembly of these three components is very important. If it is not properly debugged, the screws will jam. Also, the spacing between these three components should not be too wide or too small. Just like in the video, that's it. Mainly, these three components must be adjusted properly. Switch the M1.7 to the M1.0 screw. Just replace these parts. Of course, the corresponding M1.0 drill bit should also be used. This video introduces the change of screws. How to replace the corresponding parts. The next step is to start writing the program for assembling screws.